This is Ghostoftime1 with an announcement. What you see with Diamondo's re-review of the Hobbit Trilogy will be a small taste of what's to come when we both review the Lord of the Rings Trilogy as the 250th movie review of this YouTube page. It will also serve as the pinnacle of Diamondo's movie reviews. Furthermore, stay tuned later this year for when we review the second Sonic the Hedgehog movie featuring Idris Elba as Knuckles and Jim Carrey as Dr. Robotnik. This one is going to be a real treat. Anyway, enjoy Diamondo's re-review of the Hobbit Trilogy through the Extended Edition.
Author's Note. This video is my re-review of the Hobbit Trilogy through the Extended Editions, An Unexpected Journey, The Desolation of Smaug, and the Battle of the Five Armies, based on The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien, directed by Peter Jackson, published by Warner Bros., New Line Cinema, and Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, starring Martin Freeman, Ian McKellen, Richard Armitage, Evangeline Lilly, Lee Pace, Luke Evans, James Nesbitt, Ken Stott, Stephen Fry, Kate Blanchett, Christopher Lee, Elijah Wood, Orlando Bloom, and Andy Serkis as Gollum, featuring a special appearance of Ian Holm as older Bilbo Baggins and the voice of Benedict Cumberbatch as Smaug the Dragon. The extended editions are rated PG-13 to rated R.
My name is Bilbo Baggins.
Bagginses. What is Bagginses, precious?
Something you carry. Something made of gold, but far more precious.
Welcome, my sister's sons, to the kingdom of Erebor.
Back in 2014, with the help of Discord, Dr. Eggman, and Shadow the Hedgehog, I reviewed each of the movies of the Peter Jackson Hobbit Trilogy, An Unexpected Journey from 2012, The Desolation of Smaug from 2013, and The Battle of the Five Armies that released on that very year. And back then, these reviews were done in bite-sized segments. Well, now with a little more experience, I can review all three films once more, all on the 10th anniversary of the Hobbit Trilogy.
Where are you off to? Stop, I'm already late!
But there is a twist. First off, as you can tell, we are re-reviewing these films through its extended editions with all new footage not found in the original theatrical release. And second off, unlike previous multi-movie reviews, we are reviewing all three films all at once. That's right. We're going deep into detail into each of the three films and some of the characters that caught my eye. From the obvious like Bilbo Baggins, the dwarves, Gandalf, and Smaug, to the unexpected like Legolas from the Lord of the Rings Trilogy.
Late for what? I'm going on an adventure!
So everyone, sit back, enjoy a good ale, and tune in to the re-review of the Hobbit Trilogy, for this will be a sneak peek at what the review of the Lord of the Rings Trilogy will bring. Anyway, on with the review. In the middle of the earth, in the land of Shire, lives a brave little hobbit who we all admire. With his long wooden pipe, fuzzy woolly toes, he lives in the hobbit hole and everyone knows him. Bilbo Baggins, only 3 feet tall. Bilbo Baggins, bravest little hobbit of them all.
Bilbo Baggins, yours.
But one day, Bilbo met with a wizard named Gandalf the Grey, and 13 dwarves led by the Dwarf King in exile, Thorin Oakenshield. Their goal, to reclaim the Misty Mountains Dwarven Kingdom, the Dwarven Gold, and the Arkenstone from the fierce dragon Smaug.
Your head. Someone wants you dead.
However, the dwarves will run into a number of obstacles that block their path, from the goblins and their orc allies led by Azog the Defiler and Sung Bolg, to a magic ring that would be an ally to Bilbo, and wood elves that hold a disdain towards our heroes. And even after Smaug's downfall, one massive war will determine the fate of every soul around the misty mountains of Erebor. What makes this trilogy special is about the journey, the path to the misty mountains of Erebor. There's a kind of magic that fills each of the 3 films, be it the lore of Middle-earth to the very weapons and magic that friend and foe carry. Such is the very feeling that fantasy brings to the silver screen. Such is the magic that J.R.R. Tolkien and Peter Jackson forged with the elements of fantasy, such as elves, dwarves, and orcs.
But it is a dark and powerful magic.
But what I appreciate more are the darker, more disturbing elements of the 3 films. You know the obvious with the presence of the orcs and the very darkness that was present in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. But the one moment that impressed me the most was the Mirkwood Forest of the Desolation of Smaug, a scary place that isn't just infected with horrifying legions of spiders, but illusions that can drive one mad. Sometimes, the darkness is an interesting place to lurk in.
I can't just go running off into the blue. I am a Baggins of Bag End.
At the beginning of the trilogy, Bilbo Baggins was a rather stubborn hobbit. He didn't want any involvement with the 13 dwarves and Gandalf the Grey's quest. He wanted to eat and be left alone. But regardless of the fact that he changed his mind, Bilbo in a way had a lot of common sense compared to some of the dwarves. It's also his heart that keeps him mindful. Compared to Thorin Oakenshield, I saw Bilbo as one with better morals and far better judgment, especially when it came to the Arkenstone.
Mine.
But what I also enjoyed of Bilbo Baggins was that he was also smart and clever, and very resourceful as well. Throughout the first 2 films and a bit of the third, he figured out how to get out of these predicaments and aid the dwarves in nearly every way possible, especially with his fateful sword, Sting. But this was also the film where he discovered the iconic One Ring from Gollum. While it doesn't play as big of a role as in Lord of the Rings, it still plays a role that helps Bilbo on his quest with the dwarves and throughout the entire story.
Isn't that right, my precious?
The one dwarf I would like to talk about is Thorin Oakenshield, son of Thrain and grandson of Thor. In a way, Thorin is more of the main protagonist of this trilogy compared to Bilbo Baggins, considering what the story is all about. In addition, the strengths that Thorin carried within these films include his own bravery and its loyalty to his own kin, but he is also driven by revenge for the fall of his own kingdom, his grandfather, and even his father. Old prides die hard.
Let all those who doubted us rue this day!
Speaking of pride, that was Thorin's biggest weakness. He holds his own people in high regard compared to the humans and elves of Middle-earth, especially early on when he has little trust with Bilbo Baggins. But later on in the trilogy, that kind of pride sickens him even further when he reclaims Erebor and the Dwarven Gold, where he winds up forsaking Bilbo and even his own kind, becoming a cowardly shell of his former self. On the one hand, it was fascinating to see him fall from grace, but on the other hand, it took a lot of courage to break off that curse and to fight once more on the battlefield.
I am too old for this.
There were a number of dwarves that accompanied Bilbo and Thorin on their quest to reclaim the Kingdom of Erebor and the Dwarven Gold, but the one that stood out for me was Balin. Even despite the fact that he's younger than he looks, Balin was the wisest of the dwarves as well as one of the more common sense characters of the trilogy. But his biggest strength was his friendship with Bilbo Baggins, advising the Hobbit on his journey, and even standing up for him when no other dwarf would. His characteristics makes him a favorite of mine within Middle-earth.
He didn't. I did.
Many familiar faces from The Lord of the Rings made an appearance in this film. Gandalf, Elrond, Galadriel, Saruman, and Gollum. But the one character that surprised me in this is none other than Legolas, the wood elf who had joined Frodo and Fellowship of the Ring. He started out as stubborn as his own father, King Thranduil, but as the story went on, Legolas began to open his eyes to the waking world and to his own sympathy towards the one he loved, Tauriel. Ironically, much like Bilbo and Balin, Legolas wound up with a far clearer judgment, making him a reliable ally to the cause and what drove his character towards his future self in The Lord of the Rings.
Look at me. You look at me.
Of all the characters exclusive to the Hobbit Trilogy, I have two favorites, the first being Bard the Bowman, the one who would slay the dragon. Not only would his name go down in legend, but he was also a man of reason, as he cared for the well-being of his own people of Lake Town, of the Kingdom of Dale, a man worthy of the title King. The other character that also stood out, Dane Ironfoot. It's not just his loyalty to his cousin Thorin that makes him great, but it's also his skills on the battlefield that make him a worthy character to the dwarven cause. Besides, he's just that damn awesome.
What will you do now, Bowman?
And then we have to talk about the monster himself, Smaug the Dragon. Teeth like swords, claws like spears, scales like shields, a tail like thunder, wings like hurricanes, and his breath? Death. Though he showed up in a small portion of the trilogy, he was able to ham it up and steal the show. Even when he was holding back against Bilbo, Smaug was also known for getting into the skin of his foes with his choice of words, taunting and tormenting his would-be victims. Ironically, that serves to be the greatest asset of the Bane of Erebor. And we also have to talk about Azog the Defiler, played by Manu Bennett. While it was surprising to spare him early on in the trilogy compared to the original book, there were a lot of traits that made him a worthy adversary to Thorin Oakenshield. First, he's a vain, cold-hearted monster that kills either for sport or for satisfaction for the failures of his own kind. The other is that he's a brilliant tactician on the battlefield, boxing in his foes with nasty surprise attacks and going in for the kill. Even the final battle against Thorin proves that Azog the Defiler is one of the most ruthless villains of Middle-earth.
If Baggins loses, we eats it whole.
Fair enough.
Of all the three films of this trilogy, I enjoyed Battle of the Five Armies the most. While the first two films were all about the journey to Erebor, the final movie went all out with a massive war that puts the dwarves, elves, and humans on edge against the orcish armies, how Thorin overcame his own greed, and a terrifying climax between Thorin and Azog that makes it feel worth watching all three films back to back. Not to mention the added gore of the extended editions make the R rating worth it. Definitely the most exciting of the bunch.
That, my lad, was a dragon.
That being said, I also realized that all three films would fit better as an episodic series rather than what we have. The idea of watching each episode in bite-sized chunks rather all at once. This is especially true with the added scenes from the extended editions. Back when I started doing movie reviews in 2014, I enjoyed the idea of an entire story all in one package. But as time went on, I don't mind seeing the story split into multiple parts. ideal for those who just want to enjoy the story one part at a time rather than all at once. It helps keep the freshness of the series buried deep within the mind.
But will you follow me? One last time.
But regardless, the Hobbit Trilogy is one of the finest examples of storytelling and cinema history, with the Battle of the Five Armies outclassing both An Unexpected Journey and The Desolation of Smaug. If you have never watched this trilogy before, do check it out through the extended editions and stay tuned. Ghostoftime1 and I will be preparing the review of the Lord of the Rings Trilogy.
The greatest adventure is what lies ahead.